I'd worked in Asia my whole entire life, but I was born in Nigeria, and we suddenly started having Nigerians come on to the training, and I started coaching Nigerians. And then we went to Nigeria and we started training people there. And one of the movements there that's over 100,000 strong now among a Muslim people group is the exact people group that my father worked among. And it's just like, how did God put that all back together?
Welcome to Called Beyond, a Novo Mission podcast. We love sharing stories of how God calls ordinary people into His extraordinary mission. In this third season, our theme is Courageously Take Root. Jesus invites us to be deeply grounded in Him so that our lives bear lasting fruit. Fruit that multiplies far beyond what we could produce ourselves. Together, we'll explore stories of courage from Scripture and from today, learning what it looks like to take root in God's love and live boldly for His kingdom. Well, welcome back, you guys, to another episode of the Called Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Tim Shuck, and it is just a joy to get to explore these stories each time with you as we record these new episodes. Well, I have the pleasure of getting to welcome Cynthia Anderson to the podcast today. She was born a missionary kid in Nigeria, and she has really gotten to see God do incredible things all around the world, starting in Africa, getting to minister as an adult in Asia, and now being back in the States. She has worked with Youth with a Mission. She has authored an incredible book called The Multiplier's Mindset. She hosts a podcast called Dare to Multiply, and over the last 30 years plus has been working with Jesus to make disciples all around the world. And one of the things that I find so interesting is that Cynthia shared with us that she had a pet monkey growing up, and her dad, got to be the coolest dad ever, bought her a new wild exotic pet every year on her birthday. I am sure there are so many stories about these animals. Welcome to the podcast, Cynthia. It's so good to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim. It's really a joy to be with you. And yeah, I loved having all those crazy animals. And now I'm, working with lots of crazy people. It's lots of fun.
Well, as a podcast, right, this is not one of those video productions where everybody gets to see, and maybe if you're a listener thinking about this, maybe you've met someone in your past where you could just tell by their eyes that they have seen something incredible. And as I sit here, we have just met. I can just tell by your face, by your eyes, that you have seen some things and you have a story to tell. So I'm so excited for, well, one, selfishly myself, since this will all be new for me as well, but also for the listeners who will get to hear some of what makes you tick, some of why you're so passionate about leading people towards this experiential knowledge of God. And so I'm really thankful for the opportunity to get to talk with you today.
I'm excited too. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I do love, my passion is to help ordinary people see that God can use them in extraordinary ways. And it's a great blessing. I have seen that happen over and over. Really ordinary people, myself included. Who in the world would have thought that God would use me? But He chooses us and He does extraordinary things through us as we simply say yes and begin to step out in faith. So I'm really excited to share with your audience and with you, Tim.
That's so good. Well, as you guys know, there is a fun way that we're kind of catalyzing conversations this season of the podcast by exploring a passage from Scripture to just see where it takes us and see what stories come to the top of the mind as we reflect on this passage, as we get to know Cynthia a little bit better and hear stories from around the world. So this is going to be from John 15. And we're going to kind of jump around a little bit in this passage. So bear with me as I read this for us. And then Cynthia, if any stories start coming to mind, we'd love to hear from you as well. So John 15, verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. And then verse 8, when you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father. I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his. And then verse 16 and 17, you didn't choose me, I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit, so that my Father will give you whatever you ask for using my name. This is my command: love each other. Oof, the vine and the branches.
Mm, powerful passage.
Yeah. What just as you hear that, what's kind of imagery starts to come to mind for you?
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of great imagery in this, Tim. I think staying connected is so important. That's obviously one of the images that is so present here. When I talk about this in Asia or in Africa, I actually often will use the example of when you try to plug something into a socket. And sometimes, it doesn't fit real well or it falls out. This is really common in my life. And you've got to make sure it's connected, make sure that it is stuck in well, and
For me, it's airplanes. The
airplanes.
like the little sockets in airplanes are like the worst ever. I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and this passage kind of brings that imagery of if your plug-in gets loose, suddenly you have no power, and within a little bit of time you're gonna your battery's gonna go dead and you don't have any juice, you don't have any power to do what you're supposed to be doing, what you want to be doing. And so that imagery of the branch, I'm not a farmer, I haven't grafted things in or had that in my life, but that's what it reminds me of, staying plugged in and really connected.
Wow. Yeah, I think even as we look at this passage, the idea of authenticity comes to my mind as well. Like
Mm.
you will be able to tell who someone is plugged into by the output, right? By what comes out. Thinking of in that verse 8, when you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. Like there is an expected outflow from being plugged into this relationship with Jesus. And it's kind of one of those, oftentimes we don't like to talk about measuring results, right? The results that are God's. But one of the things that I think is really informative for the believer is, what are you leaving awake behind? What does that look like? And I know,
Mm.
Cynthia, that you have seen so many incredible things through your travels and missionary journeys and trainings and all of these different things. When you look back, this isn't an opportunity to be, prideful or boastful, but when you look at the wake of a life, what are some of the things that keep you going into what's next? What do you get excited about? What do you want to see more of?
Mm. Yeah, well, one of the things I wanted to mention, from this verse is just I often use this as the very first thing I train people in, because knowing who we are, it's out of that so much flows. And it's not so much, I've found, Tim, it's not so much the skills of disciple making or, that produce the fruit. It's the abiding in Jesus and knowing who you are in him. And this verse says you will produce much fruit. So I often
Wow.
like to talk about how if you remain in Jesus, it's a part of who we are. It's natural. It's going to happen that we would produce not just a little fruit, but that we are fruit producing. We're going to
Wow.
multiply. We're going to make other people like us. We're going to make more disciples. And so that's a part of this passage that has really encouraged me. But you're asking me kind of what keeps me going and what are some of the things that, I draw from this. I think it's, again, this identity in him is where the fruit comes from. It comes from being with him. And it is natural. So if it's not happening, then we have to ask ourselves a question: why isn't it happening? What is it that needs to change? Because this is the natural order, that if we abide in him, we will be producing fruit. We will be seeing other disciples come about through our lives. but it's remaining in him, in his love. I love that. Remain in my love. Not just, study the Bible more, but remain
Yeah.
in my love. And as we stay close to him in his love and that loving relationship and a relationship obedience that, yeah, it's natural. It's going to happen. I also love verse 16 too. Sorry, these are verses life verses for me. There's
These are
so much
so
I could
good. Thank
say.
you.
Yeah. But that he didn't, we didn't choose. He chose us. We didn't choose the extraordinary things that he wants to do through us, but he chose us and appointed us for what? To produce lasting fruit. And for me, Tim, I just see myself as such an ordinary person, but I've seen such extraordinary things happen as I just obeyed, and simply obeyed what he said. I can share an example of that if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah. So one thing that comes to my mind is back in 2019, every year I ask the Lord, what's the one thing that you want me to do this year? I'm a visionary, so I have lots of ideas. The majority of them aren't from God, but some of them are. But I always ask God, what's the one thing? If I was to not do lots of other things, or, what is the one thing? And that year in 2019, the Lord told me to put the course, kind of the training we'd been doing in person in Asia for years and training disciples to make and multiply disciples, put it into an online format. And I really had no idea what would result from that. I'd never taken an online course before, didn't know anything about how to do that, but it was just something the Lord had spoken, and I knew it was from him. And so I said yes. And I think that's a huge part of producing lasting fruit, is saying yes. When God plants a seed of an idea in your heart and you feel like it might be from him, there are lots of confirmations. And so I did. I put that up in 2019, not knowing if we'd have 10 people do the course or what would happen. And the first cohort, we had 50. The second one, we had 70. And then COVID-19 happened, which who would have known, But God knew. He prepared that, and he planted that, and he had us ready. And now we've seen over 5,000 people go through that course. We've seen in 122 nations. It's just exploded globally. And then we walk with those people. And some of the people who took that course were leaders who were leading churches of about 100. And today those movements are over 100,000. It's just phenomenal what God has done, just literally hundreds of thousands have come to faith because some crazy missionary kid like me, just listened to God and said yes and tried something I'd never done before. And today, there's so many in the kingdom as a result. But it's not because of me at all. It's because God chose me. I would not have chosen myself to do that.
Well, I mean, and there's even a parallel story here and a number in our audience are probably thinking this themselves, because the same thing happened with Novo, and we actually used the same phrase, a cohort. We started leading these things, and then also exploded during COVID. Went from a non-scalable flying people around for these little events to being able to put it online and on Zoom and getting to see it multiply all around the world. And certainly it turned something was from hundreds into thousands. And so very cool. I mean, we don't like to talk about that span of years particularly.
Really?
But there were some amazing reaching things that happened through platforms that allowed things to spread beyond kind of what we thought possible. And it's so cool. I just want to even reflect back on something you said, before that story, was just the idea that good lasting fruit is a foregone conclusion when we follow Jesus.
Amen.
And I love the fact that it's an honor to partner with God, but the pressure is not on us to perform. And I think it's so cool that we can walk in this identity of knowing that in some ways the steps that we're taking right now, we're already measured by someone else who had good things in mind for us to walk into. In the amount of, I would say, the humility that walk in, knowing that God has gone before us to prepare something good for us to do for His glory, is kind
Mm.
of an exciting prospect to even think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm just, yeah, I guess I'm kind of having this, I'm having a moment here where I'm just like, that is so cool. Um, that we get to serve a God who actually prepared our service in advance for His glory and for our benefit. Like
Mm.
it's an amazingly complicated gift in a way.
Yeah, it's so true. And, I think in my story, a part that I didn't share really emphasizes that how God prepares things in advance. My story is I was born in Nigeria. And when we started that online training, I'd worked in Asia my whole entire life, my whole adult life.
Oh wow.
We were in Nepal, we were in India, we worked in South Asia, we were currently living in Thailand. But I was born in Nigeria, and we suddenly started having Nigerians come on to the training, and I started coaching Nigerians. And then we went to Nigeria and we started training people there. And one of the movements there that's over 100,000 strong now among a Muslim people group is the exact people group that my father worked among.
Wow.
And it's just like, how did God put that all back together, the pieces of that?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even have a vision for Nigeria, but God knew. And He brought these, prayers of my father, work my father had done, back full circle. And then when I went to Nigeria, one of the people I was coaching was in the very city that I was born in. And that's this movement that's grown. I mean, it just emphasizes what you said. God is prepared in advance. He has things that He wants you to do. And as we listen and we obey, we step into them in faith, things start to unfold that are kind of beyond what you would ever have imagined.
Yeah. I love this. I feel like my stories are big in my own life, but smaller in scale to what you're talking about. But the revelation I think is the same, which is just this idea that somehow in our current reality, sometimes we walk into moments that feel like this is no accident as to why I'm here. If there's another why the other person is there, and sometimes the Lord will cause almost like a revelation, like He will reveal to you just how integrated all of these different steps had to be in order for this moment to be curated for us to walk into. And I just, to the listener, is anything coming to your mind, as you're reflecting back on your own story or things you're walking into right now that feel either one, too good to be true, or I can't believe, how did this come to be? Like, this has happened in my life enough times where I feel like the Lord, he downloaded a phrase into my mind, which actually is a part of my signature in my email now. But it's miracles occur when coincidences die. So when we stop saying, what a coincidence that these good things happened, or what are the chances, or what luck I have, then we allow God to receive glory for what He promises to do in our lives as well. It's really just, we just realized it in that moment that God's doing something.
Yeah,
And I just find that amazing every time.
Mm-hmm. So incredible. And, like you said earlier, it's not something we have to strive for or try to make happen, but we do have to be sensitive to it. What is
Yes.
God up to?
Yeah.
What is God doing? And so there's this openness and sensitivity to what God's doing around us that is needed, but it's not something we create or we make happen. One story that comes to my mind related to that is quite recent, and that's we recently moved back to the United States. And of course, I'm a disciple maker. It's my passion. I want to, wherever I go, I do the same thing. I want to make disciples. And so I was praying and I said, Lord, who do you want us to make disciples among? Give us persons of peace or people in our lives here that you would want to have us disciple, to make other disciples and work among. And the very next day, I was at our home church in Minnesota, and we just went to church like we normally would on a Sunday. And as the pastor said, turn to the person next to you and greet them. We turned to somebody next to us. I greeted this young man and I said, where are you from? Have you ever been here before? And just being friendly, just doing my normal thing. And he said, I just gave my heart to the Lord and God told me to come to this church. Wow. And I said, wow, that's really cool. I'd love to hear your story. My husband and I, we invited him to come out for dinner with us. And he told us the story of how he was gaming. And as he was gaming, he was smoking pot. He'd recently gotten out of prison. And he's gaming and he heard this voice say, repent. And he hears this voice, repent, and it gets louder and louder and he can't game anymore. He has to stop and he bows down and prays and says, Jesus, help me. I want to give my life to you. And then he asks God, what should I do? And God tells him to go to our church and plops him down right next to me and my husband. And so we were able to start discipling this young man. And through him, we've started a group of disciples and are discipling others who've just gotten out of prison. And it's like, wow, God, if I hadn't, asked that extra question, like, where are you from? Have you ever been to this church? I hadn't been listening and expecting that God's going to bring some people into my life who, he's working among, but God was working so deeply in this young man's life and has opened up an opportunity for us to work with him and disciple him. And in a similar way, we had another story in our home church talking about, we were again getting ready to start this cohort. And I asked the Lord, if there's anybody I should invite, and talked to a friend of mine, one of my friend's moms, and she's about 70 years old. And I asked her, would you be interested to take this course, and learn more about disciple making? And first she said, no, I'm too busy. I can't do it. And I said, okay, that's fine. And the next day she called me and she said, what if my whole life group did your course and learned how to be disciple makers? And I said, well, that'd be great. So I go to this life group and it's about 10 women who are over 70. The oldest one in the group is 98 years old, Tim.
Wow.
And they have been learning how to make disciples. They are leading people to Jesus. They're telling stories of Jesus. And they're people who've never invited anyone into a relationship with Jesus. They've invited people to church, but didn't know that God could use them to make disciples. And I'm just loving working with ex-convicts and over 70-year-old widows. It's so interesting how God will use anybody, and he chooses the most unusual people if we'll just step into that and say, God, I believe you can use me. That he wants to use us.
Yeah, that's so good. In a training that we recently led, one of the kind of tagline phrases that we were wanting to instill in people and get people to say, this is true about me, was that you have a celebrated role as a disciple maker. Like this is just, God says this is true about you, right? When he commissioned you to make disciples, that is as true of you today without any fruit as it is as if you had thousands of people that you had formed a disciple making relationship with. And I think identity is huge in people adopting it, especially in the West and in America and across Europe. There's this, I don't know, can't really put my finger on it. I would ask you, Cynthia, as sort of someone who's lived anywhere, I'm sure if I asked you where's home, it would be a very complicated answer because you've been so many places. And it's kind of like, well, this feels like home, but it's for this reason, but then that's home for some reason. But like, as someone who's been so many places, right? When you reflect back on the West, I know you recently moved back here. Can you maybe reflect on maybe what are some of the things that we need to be aware of that we are maybe we're disguised about? Is it as simple as we have a wrong definition, or in practice we're functioning in the wrong capacity in our churches, or what are some of the things that you can sort of pinpoint and say, this is how I would want to encourage you to adopt a disciple making identity?
Yeah. One of the things that I really notice in America, because when we work in Africa and Asia, and we're working with growing movements of new believers, anybody who has knowledge of the Bible is like, they're amazing. There's such a gold mine, and we're like, wow, you should be discipling all these other people. And that's just like a given. And when I look at the American church, there are so many people who have such rich understanding of God, who have received so much and have so much to give, and yet they're not activated. They're not giving it. They don't realize what they are capable of, I think, and how God could use them. And we've somehow in America, we've gotten confused that our role is to attend church and maybe bring someone. Easter's coming up on Easter Sunday, and God has so much more for us, so much greater things that he wants to do through us and that we are capable of in him. I think, our bar is really low, in what we expect of ourselves, or not in expectation in a negative way, but just there's so much more we're capable of. And we set our sights really low, I think, in what God could do through us. Maybe because we honor and respect, our leaders and pastors, but which is a good thing. But I think we need to realize God's called us to be disciples who make disciples, and he's anointed us and he can use us powerfully.
Yeah, and I think too, like he's really given us the influence in different places in our life where my membership at said church does not have the access to that place that I have influence more than I do, right? And maybe these people would never come to, maybe they're not even interested in coming to my church, but they are interested in coming over for dinner, thinking about your friend that you met at your church. And maybe discipling and discipleship is an outflow of relationship with people where we choose to befriend people who don't know Jesus yet. And, rather than seeing every outcome as I need to get my friends back to the place where I worship, what if the place where they worship is actually at your home, or at the place that you work, or in a nursing home, or at a gas station, or, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of one of those, like, just thinking about God blowing the box on the boundaries that we put, that he has lordship in this place on this day, with these special people. Well, what if he had lordship over all of it, and he can use you to influence those people that you already have relationship with, or that you can pursue relationship with? And
yeah, I like that. One thing that comes to my mind, Tim, as we talk about this, you talked about access. And in mission circles, we're always talking about gospel access, those who don't have access to the gospel, have never had a chance to hear. And yet there's kind of like a flip side of it, of who has access to people in the West. Like you're saying, a pastor won't be able to walk into that business and have the kind of relationship and creds that you have as a business person there. There's barriers that are there that aren't there for you if you're in business. Same with like these women. I keep telling them in these, senior living centers, they have access to people that our pastor doesn't have access to. So that issue of access, I think you hit on something really important. We have access to people who don't have access to the gospel, and mobilizing or helping activate local believers and people who are following Jesus to utilize their access. I was just doing a webinar not long ago about hunting clubs and dog owners. And there's all kinds of these oikos type things that we have that other people don't have. And those people need to hear about Jesus, and we're the ones who can do it.
gospel movement amongst the pheasant hunters of America.
There you
It's
go.
coming.
Why not?
It's
Why
coming.
not?
Well, I think, in this, even reflecting back on the passage, there's a little, not that there's a dark side of it, but there's the, what if you don't? What if you don't abide? What if you don't, remain in him? And I just wonder, what are some of the warning signs that maybe you've seen where, not connecting in the ways that God desires for us? Like, what are some of the things that you've seen happen?
Yeah, well, I could speak about others, but I think it's probably better to speak about myself. I think when I'm not connected, when I'm not abiding in him, remaining in his love, things that come up in my life are performance. I start operating out of striving, out of my own self rather than out of him. And it starts getting heavy. The your yoke is easy, your burden's light kind of thing becomes a non-reality. Burnout, depression, anxiety, all of those things I think come out of when we're not in him and letting him flow through us. We're not connected, where that plug gets loose. And yeah, when we start to take on things as our responsibility rather than his, there's that tension, isn't there, Tim, of we don't want to ignore the responsibility he's given us, to go and make disciples. It is for us, for every believer. But at the same time, he's the one who does it through us. And that happens as we abide, as we rest in who he's making us to be. And it's not our perfection, it's not our performance. So I would say those are some of the things that happen in me when I'm not abiding.
Well, yeah, and I'm seeing a picture. I'm not sure how I feel about this kind of image I'm seeing, but it's a little bit like a guy walking a dog, right? And there's three scenarios that kind of always happen, right? There's the guy walking the dog where he's dragging the dog, like the dog doesn't want to go. I'm kind of picturing a puppy just skidding across kind of a glossy surface in a store, or there's the dog that's pulling the owner. He's trying to hold him back, right? Or you get that moment where you see a dog and a owner walking perfectly in step, and you're like, man, that guy has got it figured out, right? I can see my own self in my walk with the Lord in all those ways where I'm just resisting where he's leading me at all costs, right? And we're not working together at that point. And I've had moments where I was like, come on, God, let's go. And it's just, I'm trying to pull him, doing it in my own strength. And then there's those moments, right? There's where I think what we're talking about here, where it's that abiding moment where we're in step with God, where I'm not surprised what he's doing. We're in sync. He's just happy that I'm there with him, and we're going about it together. And there's this balance there where it really is the sweet spot where if you felt that spot before in your life and you read this verse, like there's no question that you don't understand, like that you totally get what it's talking. It's like, this is when we're in step. This is when we're in sync. And to your point, it's that when we're pulling or being drug, it's like we're out of balance, right? And there's some introspection needed and some re-yoking, some being honest, from probably asking forgiveness, getting things right before we can keep moving on. Any final thoughts, Cynthia, as we kind of conclude this passage, this story?
I think what was coming to my mind from what you were just saying, Tim, is just that we need to do it with others. There is, and I think in the West we have such a independent kind of relationship with God. But when we do it in community with others and we're abiding together, we help one another walk with him better. It's not just
Mm.
abiding in him as an individual, but it's abiding together with others and saying, together we want to bear more fruit. Together we want to be all that God's called us to be. Because I'm that puppy. I'm either a little behind or a little in front, a lot of the time, hopefully not as far as I used to stray,
Sure.
but I need others to help me say, hey, let's get back in step. And I think as we abide in him, community is so important, and having others, if you're pursuing making disciples and stepping into seeing God use you in a greater way, do it with others. And I feel like we're going to have a lot more chance of being in step with him more often. I certainly do in my life.
That's so good. There's a fourth option, which is the guy who has no leash, right? He just trusts his companion. Go off and play, come back, and go walk with, that. And that probably is what we're talking about, right? And I love that you brought community into that, and just the reality that we need each other. Like, I think a lot of times, like in this idea of equipping everyday people, a lot of folks, they don't know who God says they are, but I bet their friend knows some true things about them that they can help instill to support, right? So this community of believers, that like God had a pretty good plan, like when we actually like take the Bible, put it at face value, who are we around? We kind of try to put off maybe some of our worldview, our rationalism, our fierce independence that we have as Westerners, and we realize that I don't need to have my best answer. It's okay if it comes from you or a friend, a spouse, a small group, a community of believers. Yeah, I just think it's so incredible, like the honor that it is to walk in step with Jesus, to pursue his mission on earth, not my mission on his earth, in order to see new disciples made. Cynthia, it's been so awesome to have you on. I feel like this time is not long enough to really do justice to all of the things that God could reveal through you to us for our benefit and for his glory. But I can't thank you enough for joining us for this episode, for your yes before God that has reached so many, and for you to just be humble and recognize the fact that, hey, we're kind of just figuring this thing out in this great physical earthly audition for what eternity is going to be. I love that you laugh about it and you've got a smile on your face as we just reflect on just how great God is and what an honor it is to serve him.
What a joy. Yeah. And only eternity will reveal, what each little step of obedience that we thought was nothing, did in his kingdom. I'm excited. Yeah. He's doing great things and he's going to do more. Thanks, Tim.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Man, another rich conversation. It was so good to hear from Cynthia. And man, I hope you guys got a lot out of that. I am still just reflecting on that conversation. It just seemed like almost every story that we got to kind of feel out and every example had kind of this same commonality, which really came from that John 15 passage where it isn't the nature of the person. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about Cynthia. It is all about who we are connected to. And it's the nature of Jesus, where remaining in him is what causes this kingdom fruit to happen. And so maybe you're like me. Sometimes I love hearing the big story. I love the testimony. I oftentimes will just be consuming the next best story when in reality, like I feel like what God is inviting you and me into is just believing that what happens next, that God is there. And we get to be yoked with him to see that amazing thing happen and develop in our own story as we walk with Jesus. And so I just really hope that you, like me, will have those opportunities where we get to see God show up and do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine. Thinking about how with Cynthia, where she's doing ministry now in the place where she was born, and seeing God do these amazing movemental things where so many disciples are coming to know Jesus, where it had such humble beginnings in the beginning of her life. Like, these are like pinch me moments where I love that Cynthia modeled for us this excitement of, like, it's the very first time. Even though he's been so faithful to do this time and time again, there's this amazing ability where we can still be amazed that God is choosing to do these incredible things around us. And so that's my prayer for you. It's my hope and yearn for myself, is that we will continue to see God do more than we think is possible for us. And it's because he is able and we are yoked to him. Thanks for being here. So as we close this episode, remember, you too are called beyond. God longs to grow in you a courage that takes root, endures hardship, and produces multiplying fruit for his kingdom. So we bless you in Jesus' name. May your roots sink deep into the love of God, and may courage rise within you to say yes to his call. May the courage you've heard become contagious in your life and in every opportunity before you, so that fruit you bear multiplies for generations to come. In Jesus' name.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Called Beyond is a production of Novo Mission Inc., the global missions organization committed to spark and sustain movements of the gospel among the nations. To learn more, we invite you to check us out on our website at novo.org or follow us at Novo Mission on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The music in today's episode was written by the band Wild Earth and used with permission from the artist. Thank you again for giving our podcast a listen. We hope you'll join us for more Called Beyond.